standing on the Giza Plateau today, staring up at the Great Pyramid. You're looking at a structure that was already ancient when Julius Caesar walked the earth. Think about that for a moment. When Cleopatra ruled Egypt, these pyramids were as distant to her as she is to us. But here's what blows my mind. These weren't built by a civilization at its peak after centuries of development. These monuments appeared shockingly early in Egyptian history, during a period we call the Old Kingdom, less than 500 years after Egypt first unified. Welcome back to the channel. I'm diving deep into one of history's most fascinating periods, the age when Egypt went from scattered settlements along the Nile to building structures so monumental that people still debate how they were constructed. This is the story of the Old Kingdom, the pharaohs who commanded empires of workers, and the golden age that produced humanity's most enduring architectural achievements. Before we begin, smash that subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Now let's travel back 4,500 years to when these impossible monuments rose from the desert sands. To understand why Egypt became a powerhouse, you need to understand the Nile. This isn't just any river, it's the longest waterway on Earth, stretching over 4,000 miles from Central Africa to the Mediterranean. But here's what made Egypt special: predictability. Every single year, like clockwork, the Nile would flood. This wasn't a disaster, it was a gift. When the waters receded, they left behind a layer of rich, dark soil perfect for agriculture. The Egyptians called this event the inundation, and it became the foundation of their entire civilization. The ancient Egyptians divided their world into two regions. Upper Egypt, in the south called Upper, because it sat at higher elevation, even though it's geographically south. The Nile flows powerfully through here, racing northward toward the sea. Then there's Lower Egypt in the north, where the river fans out into the sprawling Nile Delta, creating a web of waterways perfect for farming. This geography gave Egypt something no other ancient civilization had: security and abundance. Deserts flanked them on both sides, creating natural barriers against invasion. The Mediterranean Sea protected the north, and running straight through the middle, this miraculous river delivered fertilizer and transportation every single year. But Egypt had another advantage: its location on Earth itself. Between the 15th and 45th lines of latitude north, you find the sweet spot for early agriculture. Not too hot, not too cold, with enough water to sustain crops. Every major ancient civilization emerged in this band: Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, China, Mesoamerica, and of course Egypt. Egypt sat right on the edge of what historians call the Fertile Crescent, that arc of productive land stretching from Egypt through the Levant and down into Mesopotamia. When the last ice age ended around 12,000 years ago, this region received deposits of incredibly rich soil, setting the stage for humanity's first great civilizations. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans lived along the Nile as hunters and gatherers. But around 10,000 years ago, something revolutionary happened. They figured out agriculture. It probably started by accident. Someone noticed that barley grew where seeds had fallen the year before. Instead of just collecting wild plants, people started deliberately planting seeds, managing where crops would grow. This simple observation transformed human society forever. By 5,500 years ago, during what we call the pre-dynastic period, things were accelerating fast. The Egyptians invented Senet, the world's oldest board game, which shows you they had leisure time for entertainment. They were trading extensively with the Levant and even Mesopotamia. And here's where it gets interesting. Hieroglyphics appeared in Egypt right around the same time cuneiform writing emerged in Mesopotamia. Was this coincidence? Did these civilizations influence each other? Historians still debate this, but the timing is suspicious. What we do know is that by 3500 BC, sophisticated culture was flourishing along the Nile, but Egypt wasn't unified yet. Different peoples controlled different stretches of the river, from the delta in the north all the way south toward what would become Nubia, the Egyptian name for Sudan. That changed around 3100 BC with a legendary figure named Narmer, sometimes called Menes. The evidence suggests he ruled Upper Egypt first, then conquered Lower Egypt, unifying the entire Nile Valley under one crown. This unification became central to Egyptian identity. For thousands of years afterward, Egyptian rulers wore a double crown, the white crown of Upper Egypt, overlaid with the red crown of Lower Egypt. They weren't just kings of Egypt. They were rulers of two kingdoms bound together. The Narmer palette, a beautifully preserved stone carving from this era, shows the king wearing one crown on one side and both crowns on the other. It's powerful propaganda, announcing to the world that Egypt was now one. After Narmer unified Egypt, the dynastic period began. But here's something important. We don't call this the Old Kingdom yet. The 400 years following unification are known as the early dynastic period, covering the first and second dynasties. Why the distinction? Several reasons. First, the unified kingdom was still finding its footing. Trade was developing with Mediterranean cities and even Mesopotamian city-states, but it wasn't as robust as it would become. The government was weaker, less centralized. Religious practices were still evolving into the sophisticated system we recognize as Egyptian religion. But the biggest difference? These early rulers didn't build pyramids. They constructed elaborate tombs called mastabas, rectangular structures with flat roofs and sloping sides, usually made from mud brick. Impressive, sure, but nothing like what was coming. The early dynastic period was a foundation-building era. Egypt was learning to be Egypt, developing bureaucracy, establishing religious practices, creating the administrative systems that would support the spectacular achievements ahead. Around 2700 BC, everything changed with the third dynasty and a king named Djoser. His reign, lasting roughly 20 to 30 years, marked the beginning of the Old Kingdom proper. Djoser had a vision, or more accurately, his chief advisor, a brilliant man named Imhotep, had a vision. They originally planned to build a traditional mastaba tomb, but somewhere during the design process, everything changed. What emerged at Saqqara, the necropolis near Memphis, was revolutionary: the Step Pyramid. Standing over 200 feet high, constructed from more than 11 million cubic feet of stone, it was unlike anything Egypt had ever seen. It wasn't smooth-sided like the pyramids we know from Giza. Instead, it rose in 6 massive steps, each layer smaller than the one below, creating a stairway to the heavens. This wasn't just a tomb, it was a statement. The pharaoh was ascending to join the gods, but the pyramid was only the centerpiece. Djoser's complex included temples, courtyards, smaller tombs for family and officials, and elaborate decorations. It set the template for everything that followed. The idea that a pharaoh's burial site should be a complete religious and administrative complex, not just a single structure. The Step Pyramid still stands today, 4,700 years later, a testament to Djoser's ambition and Imhotep's genius. Imhotep, by the way, was later deified worshipped as a god of wisdom and medicine. That's how significant his contributions were. After Djoser came several more Third Dynasty rulers: Sekhemkhet, Sanucht, Kaba, and Huni. The king lists often disagree about their names, the length of their reigns, even the order they ruled. This is the frustrating reality of studying the Old Kingdom. Our sources are fragmentary, contradictory, and incomplete. But we know they continued Djoser's tradition. Kaaba built the layer pyramid at Zayat el-Aryan. Sekhemkhet started the buried pyramid, though it was never completed. These pyramids had an interesting feature. They were half buried underground, with elaborate tunnel systems below surface level, leading to the burial chambers. While pharaohs were obsessing over pyramid construction, what was daily life like for ordinary Egyptians? Most people were farmers. They lived in simple mud brick houses along the Nile, growing wheat and barley in the rich soil left by the annual flood. They cultivated vegetables, raised livestock, and prayed that the inundation would be strong enough to sustain another year of life. But Egyptian society was becoming increasingly specialized. Skilled potters crafted vessels for everything from water transport to food storage, to trading goods like wine and olive oil. This was crucial because pottery allowed long-distance trade. You could ship olive oil from the Levant to Egypt without it spoiling. Artisans manufactured papyrus from reeds growing along the riverbanks. This writing material would become one of Egypt's most valuable exports. Other craftsmen carved statues, painted walls, and created the elaborate funerary goods that wealthy Egyptians needed for the afterlife. And then there were the pyramid builders. Tens of thousands of workers quarried stone, manufactured mud bricks, and labored on these massive construction projects. Contrary to popular belief, these weren't slaves. Recent archaeological evidence from workers' villages shows they were paid laborers who received food, shelter, and medical care. The scale of organization required is staggering. You needed people quarrying stone, others transporting it, teams assembling it, administrators tracking everything, and a massive support system feeding and housing everyone. The pyramids weren't just architectural achievements, they were bureaucratic miracles. Here's a common misconception. Egyptian religion was obsessed with death. Wrong. It was obsessed with life, so obsessed that they developed an entire system to preserve existence beyond death. The Egyptians believed humans possessed a ka, a life force or soul. During life you nurtured your ka with food, water, and sustenance. The question was, could you preserve it after death? This drove the practice of mummification. If you preserved the body, the ka had a vessel to inhabit in the afterlife. But mummification wasn't just for pharaohs. Wealthy Egyptians were mummified too. Even animals sometimes received this treatment. The Egyptian pantheon included over 1,500 gods and goddesses, though some were far more important than others. During the Old Kingdom, Ra, the sun god, reigned supreme. He traveled across the sky in a solar boat, bringing daylight to the world. When he retired in the evening, darkness fell. Osiris, king of the underworld, was another major deity. He judged the dead, weighing their hearts against the feather of truth. If your heart was lighter than the feather, meaning you'd lived a good life, you entered the afterlife. If heavier, your heart was devoured by Ammit, a demon, and you ceased to exist. This religious system wasn't just Egyptian mythology. It influenced later Greek and Roman religions. The Greeks saw parallels between their gods and Egyptian deities, adapting and adopting concepts that originated along the Nile. The Fourth Dynasty began around 2613 BC with King Sneferu, and this is where pyramid construction reached its absolute peak. Sneferu isn't as famous as his son Khufu, but he should be. Without Sneferu's experiments, the Great Pyramid would never have been possible. Here's what makes Sneferu remarkable. He built 3 enormous pyramids during his reign. 3. Most pharaohs were lucky to complete one. His first pyramid, the Medum Pyramid, was built with steep sides in 3 layers, an evolution of Djoser's Step Pyramid concept. Much of it collapsed in ancient times, but the core remains, looking more like a fortress than a pyramid. Maybe Sneferu wasn't satisfied. Maybe he wanted to try something new. Whatever the reason, he commissioned a second pyramid at Djoser, the famous bent pyramid. As the name suggests, it starts at one angle, then suddenly shifts to a shallower angle halfway up. The result looks bizarre, but here's what's fascinating. Much of its original limestone casing is still in place 4,600 years later. Then came Sneferu's masterpiece, the Red Pyramid, named for the reddish limestone used in its construction. This pyramid was built correctly, a true pyramid with evenly ascending layers. No steps, no bends, just clean angles rising to a point. And it's massive, 5 times larger than Djoser's Step Pyramid. If Sneferu's son hadn't built an even bigger one, the Red Pyramid would probably be the most famous pyramid in the world. What Sneferu accomplished was crucial. Through trial and error, literally building 3 pyramids, his engineers figured out the optimal construction method. They learned about angles, weight distribution, and structural integrity. They developed the techniques that would make the next generation's achievements possible. Khufu took the throne after Sneferu and immediately commissioned something unprecedented, a pyramid that would dwarf everything built before it. The location he chose was the Giza Plateau, a rocky outcrop near a branch of the Nile. Water access was crucial. You're moving over 2 million stone blocks, some weighing several tons. You need water transport. Modern excavations have uncovered extensive remains of the workers' village at Giza. This wasn't a small camp, it was a substantial town housing thousands of workers, with sprawling storage facilities and fields to feed everyone. The logistics are mind-boggling. Stone was quarried throughout Lower Egypt. 8,000 tons of fine granite came from Aswan in southern Egypt, hundreds of miles away. The Nile made this possible, but it's still an incredible feat of organization. The result? 216 layers of stone, cut with remarkable precision, stacked to create a monument 480 feet high, the tallest human-made structure on Earth for thousands of years. But it's not just a pile of rocks. Inside are elaborate passages and chambers. The king's chamber held Khufu's sarcophagus. Small shaft, still mysterious point from internal chambers toward specific constellations. Were they symbolic? Practical for ventilation? Religious? Egyptologists still debate this. The entire exterior was covered in fine white limestone, giving it a smooth, polished finish that would have gleamed in the desert sun. At the very top sat a pyramidion, a capstone made from precious stone. Sadly, it's lost today, probably plundered centuries ago. What's most striking is the precision. These blocks fit together so tightly that you can't slide a knife blade between them. This isn't primitive construction. This is engineering that challenges our assumptions about ancient capabilities. After Khufu's brief successor, Djenefer, came Khafre, another of Khufu's sons, and he decided to build his pyramid right next to his father's. Khafre's pyramid measures about 470 feet, with its capstone only fractionally smaller than his father's. Was this intentional deference? Maybe. But here's the clever part. Khafre built on higher ground. From certain angles, his pyramid actually appears taller than the Great Pyramid because of this elevation difference. Some of the original limestone casing still remains at the peak of Khafre's pyramid, creating a distinctive cap that's visible today. And then there's the Sphinx. This massive statue, 240 feet long, 66 feet high, combines a lion's body with a human head. It faces east toward the rising sun, and most Egyptologists believe Khafre commissioned its construction, though some argue it was Khufu or Djenefer. The human face is thought to represent Khafre himself, though erosion has made this impossible to confirm definitively. The Sphinx has suffered damage over the millennia, but it remains one of the most recognizable monuments from ancient Egypt. Khufu's son, Menkaure, built the third major pyramid at Giza, but something had changed. His pyramid stands only 213 feet high, less than half the size of his father's and grandfather's tombs. Why? The most likely explanation is economic reality. Building those first two pyramids had strained Egypt's resources to the breaking point. The sheer amount of labor, stone, and time required was unsustainable. Menkaure's pyramid is flanked by three smaller pyramids. Possibly for his queens, the ancient Egyptians practiced polygamy. The whole complex represents a more modest approach to pyramid building. But don't think this means Menkaure was weak. We have incredible statues from his reign carved from greywack and alabaster, showing him with the goddesses Hathor and Anput. The artistry was still world-class. The fourth dynasty represents the absolute peak of Old Kingdom power. Strong central government, massive building projects, military expansion south into Nubia and north into the Sinai Peninsula. They established a colony at Bahen in modern Sudan, mining copper crucial for making bronze the cutting-edge metal of the age. The fifth dynasty began around 2500 BC with King Userkaf, and immediately you can see the difference. These pharaohs continued building pyramids, but they weren't as successful. Userkaf's pyramid at Saqqara used a cost-cutting construction method. Instead of quarrying large, well-cut stones and employing massive labor forces to move them, builders used roughly cut blocks piled together, then encased everything in fine limestone. When first built, it probably looked impressive, but once that outer limestone was removed or fell away, the inner structure was far more prone to collapse, which it did over time. Why this change? Maybe Userkaf became king late in life and needed faster construction. Maybe Egypt couldn't afford fourth dynasty scale projects anymore. Whatever the reason, it proved far less durable. The second fifth dynasty king, Sahir, built at Djoser using even more extreme cost-cutting. Walls of small rocks filled with rock chips, sand, clay, and even broken pottery, all encased in limestone. It looked good initially, but collapsed relatively quickly once the casing was removed. This points to declining royal power. The government couldn't organize projects on the fourth dynasty scale anymore. Central authority was weakening. But here's an interesting twist. While the pyramids themselves were less impressive, the temple complexes around them were grander. Sahir's temple complex featured over 1,200 feet of wall art, compared to just 325 feet in temples near Khufu's pyramid. The fifth dynasty kings were compensating less impressive pyramids, but more elaborate religious complexes around them. The sixth dynasty began around 2345 BC, and if the fifth dynasty showed decline, the sixth dynasty confirmed it. The first king, Teti, had a Horus name meaning he who pacifies the two lands. Why did Egypt need pacifying? Because there was civil strife as dynasties transitioned. Not a good sign. The dynasty was dominated by King Pepi II, who allegedly ruled for over 90 years. Now, that number is probably inflated. It might have resulted from how reigns were calculated based on cattle counts, a biannual taxation event. His actual reign was probably 60 to 70 years. But here's the problem. During Pepi II's lengthy reign, royal power eroded dramatically. The nomarchs, regional governors, and powerful nobles grew stronger. They stopped living in the capital Memphis, choosing instead to rule from their regional strongholds. This was devastating for central authority. When nobles become more powerful than the king, kingdoms collapse. The Old Kingdom officially ended around 2181 BC with the last ruler of the 6th dynasty, a king named Neferkare-Sipta, who reigned briefly. Then things fell apart. There's confusion about a 7th dynasty. Manetho mentions it, claiming dozens of kings ruled in rapid succession, but other king lists skip it entirely. Most Egyptologists think it never existed, that Manetho used it as a literary device to emphasize chaos. What followed was the first intermediate period, 130 years of instability, civil war, and rapid dynastic turnover. The 8th dynasty lasted only about 20 years with multiple short-reigning kings. The 9th dynasty saw the tyrant Akhtos usurp power. The 10th and 11th dynasties probably represented rival rulers in a divided Egypt. Compare this to the Old Kingdom's stability. 4 dynasties over 500 years versus 4 dynasties in 130 chaotic years. Pyramid construction stopped completely. Different cities declared themselves capital. Egypt fragmented. The contrast couldn't be starker. The civilization that built the Great Pyramid descended into civil war and disorder. The Old Kingdom ended, but its influence never did. When the Middle Kingdom reunified Egypt, pharaohs tried to replicate Old Kingdom grandeur. They built pyramids, though mostly from brick and clay, and most have collapsed. New kingdom rulers focused more on temples, obelisks, and colossal statues, but they constantly looked back to the Old Kingdom as a golden age to emulate, and they were right to do so. The Old Kingdom represents one of the most remarkable achievements in human history. In just 500 years, Egypt went from scattered settlements to building monuments that still stand today, structures that make us question what ancient civilizations were capable of. Of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, only the Great Pyramid survives. Think about that. The other 6 wonders were built, on average, 2,000 years after Giza's pyramids. Yet those later monuments built with supposedly more advanced techniques are gone. The pyramids remain. So what explains the Old Kingdom's achievements? Geography was crucial. The Nile's predictable floods, natural defenses provided by surrounding deserts, and location in the optimal latitude for agriculture. But geography alone doesn't build the pyramids. You need strong central government capable of organizing tens of thousands of workers. You need bureaucratic systems to track resources, food distribution, and labor allocation. You need engineering knowledge accumulated through experimentation. Sneferu's 3 pyramids, proving different construction methods until finding what worked. You need a religious system that made people willing to dedicate their lives to these projects. The Egyptians believed pharaohs were living gods, intermediaries between humans and the divine. Building a pharaoh's tomb wasn't just construction, it was sacred duty ensuring cosmic order. And you need the sheer audacity to attempt something unprecedented. When Djoser and Imhotep designed the Step Pyramid, nothing like it existed anywhere in the world. When Sneferu built 3 massive pyramids, he was experimenting on a scale that boggles the mind. When Khufu commissioned the Great Pyramid, he was ordering construction of something that would remain the world's tallest structure for millennia. The Old Kingdom lasted roughly 500 years, from approximately 2700 BC to 2181 BC. During that time, Egyptians built monuments that have defined their civilization for over 4,000 years since. But it wasn't just about pyramids. The Old Kingdom saw the development of hieroglyphic writing, sophisticated religious systems, complex bureaucracy, long-distance trade networks, and artistic achievements that influenced Mediterranean cultures for centuries. Was it a golden age? Absolutely. Could it have been more than pyramid construction? Sure, we know less about daily life, literature, and social systems than we'd like because those pyramids and tombs dominate the archaeological record. But here's what I find remarkable. Humanity was capable of this 4,500 years ago. These weren't primitive people stumbling through darkness. These were engineers, administrators, artists, and visionaries who accomplished things we still struggle to explain today. The Great Pyramid alone required moving 2.3 million stone blocks, some weighing over 15 tons, with Bronze Age tools and wooden sleds. The precision is so exact that the base is level within inches across 756-foot sides. The cardinal directions align almost perfectly with true north. Modern engineers study these structures to understand how they were built. We have theories, ramps, levers, massive labor forces, but honest scholars admit we don't know for certain. That's humbling. So here's my question for you. What do you think of the Old Kingdom? Was it a remarkable culture that achieved the impossible? Or was it primarily focused on pyramid construction while neglecting other aspects of civilization? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive into ancient Egypt, check out the video appearing on your screen now, where we explore another incredible period of history. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss our historical investigations. Where are you watching from? Have you ever seen these pyramids in person? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next journey through history.